I want to talk to you today about the possibility that the kind of world we'll live in will depend in large part on how we tackle youth unemployment, whether we can develop an integrated and a multidisciplinary approach to the problem of youth unemployment around the world. Now, why is that so important? Well, right now on our planet, there are 1.2 billion young people between the ages of 16 and 24. 87% of them live in developing countries where there are few jobs and where the education and training systems are seriously often out of sync with the needs of modern economies. It's easy to kind of recite these statistics, but when you listen to these young people, I noticed that actually many of them do not feel that they have a future. To imagine, what if we imagine what it's like to be 24 and not having any hope for your future? And being in Rio, or Karachi, or Cairo, or Cape Town, or Phnom Penh, or Jakarta, or Los Angeles. I first became aware of the interrelationship between unemployment, loss of hope, and political instability when I went to Lima, Peru. In 1995, I met a young man who asked me a question that I will never forget. His name was Jorge, and he asked me, "Lady, do you think we're stupid? Don't you know that we're 30 years behind the young people in terms of skills in the rich countries? What will become of us? Will we ever have a future?" Most of us, including most of the world's donors up until now, have tried to answer his question by going at the problem through a single sector kind of approach. For example, more and better education, right? That should fix it. But consider this, in many developing countries, having an education actually makes you less likely to get employed. Still others think this is a problem that can be solved by more economic growth, right? But consider this, many developing countries have seen a 5 to 7% GDP growth over the last few years, and yet that GDP growth has not translated to better skills, better jobs, and better lives. In the 45 countries where I've been working, I've noticed that this single sector approach often doesn't work. It doesn't produce sustainable results. And so I began to get fascinated by the handful of examples of countries that have actually managed to transform themselves from poor to relatively well-off in just one generation. You see, I was still trying to answer Jorge's question. And today I want to share with you two examples, one from the state of Penang in Malaysia and one from Ireland, and to share with you how they've done it. So let me start with Penang, Malaysia. When Penang, which is a state, got its independence along with Malaysia from the Brits in 1960, they had virtually nothing. Their prime minister wanted three things for their people, and the prime minister said, "I want my people to have a driver's license, a credit card, and a passport." Why a driver's license? Well, that means we have enough money to build roads and enough money to buy cars to drive on them. Why a credit card? Well, that means that we have assets against which we can borrow. And why a passport? Well, that means that we have the means to travel, that my people are oriented to the outside world. And so when the leadership began to think about how they could produce this result in Penang, they thought that if they could make products that are sophisticated consumer products that they could sell in the rich countries, they could create the jobs and the skills and the incomes. And by 2007, they had 200 multinational companies in Penang, Malaysia, working there, centering their operations there. Now, how did they do it? Penang officials almost gave away their land, and they almost gave away their labor. But there's one thing they insisted on. "We want to do your training," they told the multinationals. "Oh, no, you can't have our training manuals. Those are our secret sauce," the multinationals told them. But they prevailed, and that was the birth of the famous Penang Skill Development Center. By 2007, all these multinationals had come to Penang, and by 2007, enrollment of young people in university and technical education had grown from 0.5% to almost 94%. What lessons can we pull from this? Number one, the importance of an economic future-based vision for the country. Number two, an aligned strategy that integrates the different kinds of reforms that are needed. And number three, the strategic use of the private sector to move yourself up the skill and knowledge ladder. Let me now go halfway around the world to Ireland between 1980 and 2000. Ireland in 1980 was the poorest country in Europe. The young people in Ireland who could had left, many of them to work in the information technology industries in other countries. The president called the stakeholders of Ireland together and said to them, if we don't do something, in one generation there will be no more Ireland. Our young people have left. What was left were just young people who couldn't find jobs. So the Irish Development Authority decided on a strategy that would bring back Ireland's young people in one generation, and here's how they did it. Number one, they went out to attract call center companies, thinking that was at least something that their young people, their high school graduates, could do. And they were able to attract the call center companies to come to Ireland. And at the same time, they asked the community colleges to teach call center skills. But the brilliant thing is, they also asked them to teach the skills that are required to make the equipment that runs the call centers. And they realized that they could only keep the call centers for 5 to 7 years before they would leave for a lower cost country. So during those 5 to 7 years, they worked like crazy attracting equipment making companies to come to Ireland, and they did. And they had the workforce to take care of them. Again, the IDA, Irish Development Authority, knew that they could only hope to keep these equipment making companies for at best a few years before they would leave. And so they essentially forced the community colleges and the universities to start teaching those skills that are necessary to run the software that runs the equipment that runs the call centers. Now, mind you, there were no software companies at the time in Ireland, and it was quite difficult, I was told, to get the colleges and universities to teach these skills. But they prevailed, and then they went out and sold like crazy to get companies, IT companies, to come to Ireland. And within 4 years, Intel had come, and that opened the floodgates. By the year 2000, Ireland became known as the IT capital of Europe, and its young people had come back. What lesson can we pull away from that? Again, a future economic vision that is very clear, an aligned strategy, and aligned action to bring that vision about, and again, strategic use of the private sector, right, to move themselves up the skill and knowledge ladder. The big takeaway that I would love for you to have out of this is the importance of seeing the criticalness of integrated action that doesn't address the problem of youth unemployment or unemployment in general from just one sector, but the bringing together of multiple sectors. It's a whole systems approach that's required. The second takeaway is the importance of leadership. Whether it's leadership from the top down, as in Penang, or leadership from the bottom up, as in the case of Ireland, you need strong leadership to help set that vision and hold people accountable. And it's not easy. And the third takeaway is the criticalness of using the private sector strategically to learn the skills that are needed in order to move yourself up that economic ladder. What will this take to make it happen? Well, it will certainly require different kind of thinking on the part of many of the people involved in international development, right? It will require different thinking on the part of the governments, whose ministries are not used to working together and often fight with each other for resources. It will be a big challenge for the private sector, who's not used to working together with the public sector in many countries. It will be a big challenge for many of the world's donors who are really used to tackling these kinds of problems through a single sector window, like education, or agricultural development, or economic development. And let's face it, it will also take different kind of thinking on our parts. Those of us in international development, many of us have been trained in just this one discipline, and we're used to seeing problems in their parts and not the whole. However, we've realized that the complexity of the problems that are facing us today is so great that we also need complex solutions. And there are a number of tools and models that are emerging that will make it easier for us to solve these problems in their messy, complex nature. I feel confident that if we today, as a global community, came back to Jorge, we could tell him that, Jorge, your children can have a better future. Thank you.